I'm Wendy, leading the presentation group. Today we will be focusing on other forms of oral storytelling, specifically spoken word, which is a really fun way to tell stories in a very expressive and performative way. First, we're going to go through a few objectives for today. We're going to learn about how spoken word is used to tell stories, and we're going to also learn how to practice using creative techniques to tell our stories. What is spoken word? Spoken word is a poetic performance art that is word-based. As this term already defines itself, they're words that you speak out loud, but in a very performative and expressive way. In this slide, there are coffee, there's music, and a microphone. That's because a lot of spoken word takes place in coffee shops and music clubs. Sometimes activists use spoken word as well, and it is shown through the public, which is why I have a microphone in this slide. What is slam poetry? Slam poetry is a branch of spoken word that takes place only in competitions, which is the main difference between slam poetry and spoken word. Now that we know what spoken word is and what slam poetry is, which is just a branch of spoken word, we want to learn about some of the components to spoken word so that we can make our own spoken word piece as well. Now there are 3 spoken word components. There's first 6 storytelling building blocks, there's performance art, and there's poetic and creative components. Now I'm going to go over the 6 storytelling building blocks and how they're incorporated in spoken word. First, there are characters. There are characters who have an obstacle and a desire to overcome that obstacle. There is a trajectory of how those characters overcome those obstacles and how they are able to learn from their conflicts and their resolution with a message to tell the audience what those characters learned. As always, in any story you tell, you want to stay real. Just to add on with staying real, in any story you want to appeal to your audience with emotions. Your characters in your story will have a lot of emotions, and you want to express that in your story. Most importantly, to get your audience's attention, you want to hook them into your story through your hook, to get your audience to listen to your amazing story. Lastly, as a storyteller, you want to be genuine. Now, what distinguishes spoken word from other types of oral storytelling, such as giving a presentation or giving a speech? Well, it is a performative art. First, spoken word incorporates public speaking techniques that I've talked about in 2 videos ago, where you use a lot of gestures, you can use short phrases, and you don't have to use complete sentences. Sometimes you can quicken your pace, you can slow down your pace. All of that are part of public speaking techniques that are used in spoken word as well to get your audience engaged with you telling your story. And the part that makes spoken word a performative art is that it's very expressive, where facial expressions are used, where different voices of emotions are used. In any story that you tell, you want to incorporate creative aspects, especially in spoken word, when the point of spoken word is to engage your audience in a very interesting and captivating way where you can tell your own poems verbally. That includes using similes and metaphors to compare one object to another or one scenario to another. And then there is flashback and foreshadowing, where you can use that as a hook to start getting your audience's attention to what your story is about. Once you hook your audience in to your story, you want to continue making your story interesting, and you do that by incorporating imagery where you show, don't tell. That means you will use your 5 senses, which includes sight, touch, smell, hearing, and taste. All of those really helps illustrate what your story looks like and bring your story to life. You can use repetition to emphasize certain points that you want to make. A really common example is I have a dream. When you repeat that phrase, you're able to articulate those few points that you really want to emphasize. Lastly, symbolic characters. The characters in your story can symbolize a larger idea about the society or a certain message that you're trying to portray in your story. All of these creative aspects that I've just talked about are some of the main ways you can make your story interesting. Because you're able to use all of these creative aspects in spoken word, that's what makes spoken word so interesting, because of the flexibility that you have in telling your story. I highly recommend watching a lot of slam poetry videos and spoken word videos to get a better idea what that means. We also wonder how spoken word even came about to begin with, right? Well, oral storytelling existed thousands and thousands of years ago when written language didn't even exist yet. The traditions of telling stories orally passed down from generations to generations. Because of that, we're able to evolve into what we now call spoken word, where these stories are told not just within our own cultures and own groups of people, but they are now told publicly. And that evolved from spoken word when it was used in jazz and using beats to tell poetry to make it sound more interesting rather than just reading it through a paper. And in 1984, that was when people used slam poetry as a form of competition to compete with other people to tell their own stories. And that has evolved today to becoming a worldwide phenomenon where spoken word is really common and popular. And you can find them in many videos as well. Now that you learned a lot about spoken word and slam poetry and different creative elements that are implemented in those forms of oral storytelling, I want you all to pause this video and practice writing your own spoken word piece for 3 minutes. That is a very short amount of time, but this is a good way to write a spoken word piece spontaneously. As a tip, I recommend jotting 1 through 10 words per line, spilling any ideas that you're thinking about, and other things that are important in your life. I hope this was helpful in learning more about spoken word and the different components to it so that you can create your own spoken word piece. I honestly think that spoken word and slam poetry are underrated forms of oral storytelling. So I highly encourage you to watch some videos of other people's stories. If you also want to learn more about the spoken word and slam poetry culture, I highly encourage you all to go to a coffee shop or a music club just to get a sense of what it is. Sometimes they have events where people in the public can give a spoken word piece, and I have once did that before. It was my first time. It wasn't even a poetry at all. It was just a story that I wrote on my phone before. So use that courage to tell your own story to people that you don't know, to your friends, to your family, to anyone that you want to tell your story to. I encourage you all to create your own spoken word piece to tell your own story. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Bye.